Please welcome Vince Bovino.
What would your organization look like if you improved your operating performance 10, 15, 20, 25% over the next 12 months? Ask yourself another question, and that question might be, does performance improvement thinking and behaviors penetrate every corner of your organization? If the answer is no, therein lies a huge opportunity for improvement. If you look at business leaders today, we find that the top folks, regardless of their function, accounting, HR, operations, are constantly looking for different and better ways to run their operations. They cannot create a different future by clinging to the current policies and current operating methods. They are constantly challenging the present and gently and sometimes not so gently stirring their organization and leading their organization in that quest for a better future. This talk today is about operating excellence and that better future. It's not about me, it's about you, HR leaders. It's about your shareholders, the people that own your organizations. It's about your employees, because we're going to talk about an incentive pay piece. And of course, it's about the customers, because they are the recipients of the products and services that you provide. In the face of our nation's greatness, we are underperforming in many, many areas. If you look at the last decade, put out by the BLS, we find that productivity in all sectors increased an average of 1.2% a year. In manufacturing, even worse than that, 0.8% average improvement. And that's unacceptable for a nation as great as we are. You look at the GDP of this country, I already said we're about 18.6 trillion. That rivals number 2, China, number 3, Japan, and number 4, India, and rapidly rising India. The United States GDP is greater than all of those put together. Businesses today are not receiving full value from their investments in technology, equipment, material, and more importantly, their people. Most painfully to me, as I work around the country and out of the country, I get concerned that many of the gains previously realized are slowly being dissolved in the pool of organizational complacency. Our valued employees, those people that make and break us, are underperforming, not because they are bad employees or inferior employees. They underperform in part because we as business leaders fail to implement the systems that encourage employees to sprint the extra mile. Ask yourself the question, how many people you have in your company, whether it's 10 or whether it's 1,000, how many of them on a daily basis go that extra mile to make the business better, to satisfy the company, to improve the operating performance, to improve the profitability? The technology of motivation and people management lags by decades other business technologies. Now, how do I get away with saying that we're underperforming? Yeah, I gave you some BLS data, not BS data, BLS data from our government. But we have found if you go out and launch the system that we're going to talk about, a 10, 15, believe it or not, even a 30% improvement in operating performance can be realized. However, it is only realized if employees have more knowledge of the business, have a good understanding of the performance in their particular department or work area, are asked for their ideas for betterment, help implement those ideas, and are financially rewarded. So, we have the government data. We have our own experience with a 250 some odd implementations throughout the United States, Canada, Australia, South America. What's really interesting is if you go out, and I've done this, and I challenge you to do it. If I go out and talk to someone who's running a press, making parts, and I say, I get permission to go from the general manager, go up and talk to him, and I say, tell me what you're doing. And he says, well, I'm making these parts. And then I say to him, well, how many do you make a day? And he says, well, about 300. Worse, sometimes people say, I don't know how many I'm doing, but go to this person. He says, I make about 300 a day. And then I ask him another simple question. Could you do 30 more? And the answer is always yes. It's a 10% improvement. I don't then ask why, because then that puts the discussion in an uncomfortable environment. I don't want to do that. So that's someone in a production environment. So let's say I go to the accounting department, the accounts receivable people, and I say to the person who's in that particular role, how many invoices do you process a day? Now you've got a complex business, you've got a lot of checking to do before you can approve them. And they say, I do about 50 a day. I say, okay, could you do 5 more? And the answer is always yes. And then I'll go to an engineering department where someone is drawing up some very, very complex drawings on a CAD, and I say to that person the same kind of thing. How many of these drawings do you do in the course of a week? And the answer comes back, well, I think I can do about 5 a week. And I ask them the question, could you do 1 more a week? That's a 20% improvement. And the answer comes back, yes. I challenge you to take that same approach with some of your people and just ask them. Now, you can't run out there like a bull in the china shop and say, well, I'm not going to do that for you right here because he's taken a video of this thing. But be gentle about it and just approach people and you ask them, could you do more? And I think you'll find the answer is always yes. In fact, I ask every one of you in every one of your tasks, could you do more in the course of a day? And I know your answer would be yes. There is no Silk Road to operating excellence. However, there are 4 basic systems that will catapult any company's operating performance to the next level. These 4 systems serve as the core to creating the high-performance organization. From these 4 systems, you can bolt on, add on a wide range of other improvement initiatives such as predictive maintenance, inventory control, various safety programs, a variety of lean tools, and Kaizen events. You can lean and Kaizen the devil out of your organization, but you will never achieve the optimum level of your full potential unless you launch those basic 4 systems: measures, incentives, communications, and teams. And don't walk out of here saying, oh, that speaker doesn't like Kaizens. I love Kaizens. That speaker doesn't like lean. I love lean. We use lean in all of the performance improvement teams that we train. But that's such a microcosm of the betterment process. You must have the core model in place. The core model is not some paperclip counting campaign. It is the foundation of operating excellence. It's not a footnote as to how to achieve operating excellence. It's the book. Today's talk is spawned from our massive experience designing and implementing high-performance organization model. Today, you're not going to hear about management theory. You're not going to hear anything that comes from academia. What you're going to hear about is just hard-knuckle, non-stop experiences. This slide talks about the 4 systems: the performance measurement system, the incentive pay system. And by the way, the purpose of the incentive pay system is primarily to improve operating performance. However, in today's economic environment, and I know you folks know this, how difficult it is to recruit and retain people, you will find that if you add an incentive compensation that's meaningful to your overall compensation package, you'll find yourself being in a little bit of a more competitive position. and then a communication system, and then a performance improvement team system. We're going to walk through these systems, and you'll see that there's a high level of employee engagement. You know, HR people today are constantly talking about engagement, 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 engagement. Well, let me tell you, by the time we finish this, you will see that there's a massive level of engagement. Now, the industry is, the industrial workplace is littered with initiatives that have been launched and have gone belly up. They haven't even come out of the chute. How many of you in here, and this is a question of integrity and honesty, how many of you in here have been part of an organization that's launched some kind of an issue? I don't care if it's improvement, communication, whatever it is, cost control, and the system has failed? I see a lot of hands. Doesn't surprise me. What I want to talk with you about, what you have to do to make this process work, and it'll also apply to other initiatives. We have to link together those four systems. Forget everything else that I'm going to talk about today except the power of linking those four systems together. That's absolutely essential. And let me give you an example. Let's start out with the performance measurement system, and let's say we put, let's say we put 4 key performance indicators. Those are the things that drive the success of the business. Let's say we put those in place. Now we want to link those to the other system, perhaps the incentive pay system. So how do you do that? Let's say you have those 4 key performance indicators. That's your measurement system. You want to link that to the incentive pay system, so the only thing that you're going to incentivize are those 4 key performance indicators. Because if those are the things that drive the business, that's what you want people to do. Moving on to the next component, the communication system. Now we know those 4 things we're going to measure, we're going to incentivize them, and those are going to be the core of the communication system. So people get feedback literally on a very regular basis, in some cases daily, weekly, monthly, as to how well they're doing. And then enter the performance improvement teams. And you know where I'm going with this. What are the performance improvement teams going to work on? They're going to work on those 4 key performance indicators, improving those. And in fact, we feel so strongly about it that when we train those teams, we simply say, if a topic comes up that doesn't address those 4 measures, it goes off the table. Because what we want to do is have the organization define the measures, incentivize the measures, communicate the measures, and lastly, when those teams get together, they work on improving those measures. There's another thing that has to happen to make this process work really well. All of those systems have to be superbly designed and rigorously implemented. There's about 40 plan design features that must be addressed in order to have your plan be complete. Should temporary employees participate in the improvement process? Or should they participate in the incentive pay system? What do you do about regular part-time employees? When do employees become eligible for the incentive pay plan? Who's responsible for developing the communication system? How often do you rotate members out of the performance improvement teams? And how do you legally and equitably, not equally, distribute the incentive fund to employees? Superbly designed means both completeness and correctness, not politically correctness, organizationally correctness, and operating performance correctness. Anytime you start the debate and putting the plan together, you'll end up, and we do this with a cross-section of the organization, and you raise all these issues that I've talked about, and there's 30 or 40 more of them. The debate rages on and on and on and on and on. And ultimately, somebody, the facilitator, has to say, okay, what's the decision that's going to make the business the most successful? That's the key question. And if you get the answer to that question correctly, this should be part of your plan. So what's the other thing you have to do? So we got them linked together. We're going to design them superbly. We're going to implement them rigorously. And so then the next piece is employees have to have confidence and trust, especially when you're dealing with incentive pay systems. If employees think you're screwing with the numbers, you're dead meat. It won't work. And I've seen companies mess with the numbers, and that's clearly a fatal flaw. I don't have to tell you that. So one of the ways to ensure confidence is to build your plan with a cross-section of the organization. And if you want to put a manager on the team, fine. You want to put a superintendent on the team, fine. You want to put a supervisor on the team, fine. You want to put an informal leader on the team, fine. You want to have a punch press operator on the team, that's fine. You want an accounting clerk on that, fine. Get a cross-section of your organization. And if you're interested on the criteria to select people to be part of that team, give me a call. I'll be happy to share that with you. I've got it all written up, and I'll be happy to fire it out to you. So the way to build that confidence is have a cross-section of the organization. So when Johnny or Susie is out on the floor in the operation, in the warehouse, in the manufacturing plant, in the office or whatever, and people come up to that person and say, hey, are these numbers really right? You'll say, yeah, they're right. I looked at them. I know they're right. Believe it or not, well, of course you believe it, that person's comment carries much more credibility, and I don't mean to diminish anybody. It carries a lot more credibility than those in the organization with fancy titles. I've seen lean being put in place in organizations, and employees say, what's in it for me? And of course, you get the nice, warm, fuzzy responses that come out. But at the end of the day, there is a little bit of capitalism in every one of us. And clearly, with a full-bore organization plan like we have here, what's in it for me is reflected in the incentive pay system. And what I want to talk about now is the performance measurement system. And as you can see there, the slide says the most solid principle of improvement is what's get measured gets done. Improvement in any organization starts with a suite of well thought out measures that support the achievement of the company's mission and business strategy. We all know that organizations can't get better unless they know their current levels of performance. I have long maintained an uninformed workforce is an underperforming workforce. Some companies undermeasure, some companies overmeasure. They have so much data, they don't have any information. And what's even more disturbing is to go to an operation and ask them a question, hey, give me your quality data. And someone will say, well, what department do you want it from? Accounting has a quality data. And by the way, their numbers are a little bit different than what the quality department has and then what the operations people have. And I'm sitting back, how the heck do you run an organization where 3 people have quality, 3 departments, 3 functions put out a report on your quality performance, and all the numbers are different? Therein lies a huge opportunity. So what we want to do is we want to have a single source of data that's credible and true to form. Now, in the performance measurement system, we're talking about a 2-tier measurement system. And you know what key performance indicators are, right? Those are the macro, big picture level measures that drive business success. And typically, and then you have your line of sight target measures. So let's take a look at key performance indicators. It's really interesting to me. I'll have a company call me up and say, Vince, we've been wrestling with putting together we read some of the stuff and we attended a session that you spoke at, and we've been wrestling with putting together key performance indicators, and we're having a heck of a time. We got a bunch of folks together and they can't seem to agree. Well, the reason they can't agree is you haven't put a definition on it. And so let's take a look at a definition of key performance indicators. Measures the performance of the overall business unit, plant, mill, smelter, distribution center, etc. They are macro measures that drive business success, And this next one is important. They measure an outcome or a result, not necessarily a process or an activity. Conducting a safety audit or attending a safety meeting is an activity. Important as it may be, does not rise to the level of a key performance indicator. Equipment availability is also critically important to the success of the business, but not a KPI. The outcome is what that machine produces. Key performance indicators also are typically monthly measures because you typically have financials involved in the process, and the number should range somewhere between 4 and 7, never fewer than 4, and seldom more than 7. Now, one of the neat things there's a guy by the name of Sam Strasbaugh, a former client, and we did 5 plants for Sam. And Sam and I were out having dinner one night after we finished the 5th plant, and he said to me, he said, you know, Vince, this thing's made the company millions of dollars, and it's put a lot of money in employees' pockets. Our product gets shipped to the customer more on time than it ever has in the past, and the quality of the product is better, and we run a safer operation. But you know, one of the real values are that we now have organizational alignment. Every single employee in our company is focused on those key performance indicators. And that organizational alignment is of huge value. And I never knew it until we launched this initiative. Some classic metrics in a manufacturing operation, which would be cost productivity, which is a measure of controllable non-labor cost per unit of output. Employee productivity, and that's the granddaddy of them all. This is a measure of units of output per paid hour worked. Organizations across this land are constantly using a dinosaur measure of labor cost as a percent of sales. Anybody see a problem with that? What happens if you go out and you increase your selling price of your product by 10%? All of a sudden, labor productivity goes up 10% if you use that metric. What you want to use is hours against output. What we want to measure is units of output per paid hour worked. A straight time hour is 1, a time and a half hour is 1.5 hours. And then, of course, you have to have a customer-focused metrics because, let's face it, the business is all about the customers. And what do customers want besides low price, good service? They also want product quality, and they also want on-time performance. So we frequently see on-time performance and product quality as fitting into the overall set of key performance indicators. Now, I want to move over to line of sight targets. Line of sight targets are many performance measures specific to a team or work area or a department. They can measure results and outcomes. They can measure processes or activity. The number is typically around 2 or 5 for a department. And they are literally daily and weekly, a few times they're monthly measures. And they are visual displays of performance on a timeline chart. Think about it. The key performance indicators, because they're tied to financials, a report comes out at the end of the month. It's a historical document. The deal is already done. The real value of a measure that will change behavior is the line of sight targets. Literally measures performance in different work areas on a daily basis. So employees come back to work the following morning or whenever their shift is, and they look at a chart and it shows them the performance of the previous day. And if the dots over the last 30 days are moving in the right direction, that's a good indication if that line of sight target is going to have a direct impact on a measure that drives the incentive. Is a good indication that there may be some money, that there's going to be some money in the bank. If the dots are going south, it gives people a chance to fix it. Here's a line of sight target. It's really simple. You've got the red line, which is the baseline performance. You've got the blue line, which is the value of all of the blue dots. You've got the green line, which is the goal. and the blue dots represent performance, daily performance. Yeah, add a new dot to the far right, the old dot on the left-hand side disappears, and maybe that blue line moves up and down a little bit. So, you know what a line of sight target is, and now that's an image of one. And the key is not just to put these charts up and paper the walls. The key is for these charts to be available in the work area, reviewed by the leader of that department, and reinforce good performance or talk about ways to reverse performance that's going south. If you've got declining dots, that's kind of like the canary in the coal mine. It's giving you an indication that something is not right. Now, let's take a look at the next slide, please. Incentives change the game. Employees rewarded for cost savings will buy smarter, reduce waste, cut scrap, and spend the company's money as if it was their own. Superbly designed incentives will put any classic continuous improvement initiative on steroids. There are about 22 principles for a meaningful incentive pay system, and I'd like to go through a couple of them with you. Number one, the performance measurement and the incentive pay system must be ultra-transparent and scream integrity. I've already talked about that a little bit. Principle number one, high level of integrity. Employees must understand how the incentive pay system was developed and have confidence in the fairness and accuracy of the calculations and the reporting. Next, the incentive pay system must be fair to the shareholders, fair to the employees, and responsive to the needs of the customers. Next principle, be very, very careful about rewarding something that may result in an unintended consequence. So the principle reads, don't reward the wrong behavior or the wrong result. Think through the possible undesirable or unintended consequences. Let me give you an example. I gave a lot of examples in our federal government where things that are done that produce unintended consequences. I can probably give you some examples of some of the HR policies that I've created and you've created. Yeah, they were well intended, but quite frankly, didn't get the job done. In one particular case, we had a company that wanted to measure on-time performance of a product. Very good. Nothing wrong with it. Oh? What was happening is when they realized that certain product could not get put out on time and they were already going to get penalized for it, the product just got shoved aside and they continued to work on getting the new products out on time. And if a product was going to be shipped and it was going to be shipped late, nobody spent time on it, so they just were sticking all of these late shipments aside. So the right measure is on-time percentage, and a secondary measure for those shipments that are late, how late are they? So what we wanted to measure was on-time shipping percent and average days late of those units or those orders shipped late. Next principle I'd like to share with you is baseline performance. And this is an interesting one. A baseline performance is that level that you have to get above in order to get into the money. And leaders typically want to set these baselines extremely high because they think that's going to drive performance. Wrong. Baselines and the models that we recommend is average historical performance over the last 12 months. Baselines are not goals. They're not where you'd like to be. They are not industry average. They're not where the boss wants you to be. They are average historical performance. Now, the next question is, if you put together some self-funding KPIs, that means a KPI that when you can calculate from going from point A to point B, you can calculate the value of that. And you have to figure out, okay, I can calculate the value of that, but how much of that do I distribute back to the employees? First of all, stop the nonsense of 50-50, okay? Get rid of that. Get that notion out of your mind. If you distribute about 35% of the value of the improvement, and by the time you put in some other metrics that are non-self-funding, and you add in all of your statutory payroll add-ons, you're coming close to a 50-50 model. We worked with a company where the board of directors, in their infinite wisdom, said to me, Vince, I want you to put in the model and I want you to distribute 50% of the value of the improvement. And I said, no, that's too much. You don't need to do that. And so they relinquished and they sat back, okay, tell us what we need to do. And so we distribute in every single of the 250 models that we've put in place, 35% of the value of the improvement above the baseline goes to the employees. Now, this slide shows you a fund chart. And this is important stuff. There's some real value to the way this is laid out. If you take a look at this, you can see a number of things. First of all, across the horizontal axis, you can see what their production was for the period in place. It was 16,500 units. And they decreased their cost from the baseline of $114 to $112. Okay? So there's a $2 per unit savings times 16,500 is going to give you $33,000. That's the company. That's the amount that was saved. 35% of that value goes to the employees, and it's the $11,550. And what you want to put together is some kind of a visual image that people can look at and see what their output was, what their cost was, and what the actual amount that they earned was. And more importantly than that, or of equal importance to that, is that if they improve at different levels, let's say they moved up to $18,000, and $111.20, that fund now grows to 20 grand. So people can see different levels of performance will generate different levels of incentive pay. The last thing you want to do is put a system in place in which you go out and simply say, hey, we all did really well, everyone's going to get a 5% bonus this month. Everyone says, fine, thank you, but where'd it come from? What did we do or what did we not do? Visual models. The last thing you want is someone coming out and simply saying, hey, here's the amount of money that everyone has earned. Here's one where we're measuring product quality. The measure is PPM, parts per million return to reject rate. In this particular case, the baseline performance is 6,000, and if you repeat that performance, there's zero payout. If, in fact, you reduce the PPM, which is good, then you can go as high as 9,000, or if you do twice as bad as average and you go to 12,000, there's a $9,000 takeaway. This is a non-self-funding number. So the question you might have is, where do you get that $9,000 number? You sit around, you talk to the team that you put together, and you talk to the leadership and say, if we can get perfect product quality for 3 consecutive months, what is it worth to the organization? And no one could quantify that, but you ultimately have to. And what these typically represent on product quality and even on on-time performance, somewhere around 2 or 3% of payroll. So now you have the self-funding models, the non-self-funding. Let's take a look at one more type of a pay model. And this one's safety. So you know the classic OSHA frequency and severity metrics. And on the vertical scale, we have the frequency rate. Horizontal scale, you've got the severity rate. In the upper right-hand corner, you have 3 months of perfection with nothing happening. And right up under that 0, you see a 25%. Down in the lower left-hand corner with bloody lousy performance, you see a minus 25%, and then numbers all in between. What do you do with those? This is called a multiplier chart. This is the third type of chart. And in this particular case, let's assume all of the other KPIs produced $10,000. And you also had 3 months of perfect performance. You see a plus 25%. So you take 25% on top of the 10,000, gives you $2,500, goes into the pot. If in fact safety performance is lousy, you take away $2,500 or different increments in between. So now you've seen self-funding, non-self-funding, and this is a multiplier chart. Now comes a fun discussion. The next two principles may sound like a contradiction. This principle says the reward must be frequent and close in time to the performance that produced the reward. Those of you that are behaviorists, you know darn well that you've got to give the reward to employees as close as possible to the performance that generated. We all know that, right? But as executives, they're also looking at this next principle is sustained excellent performance should be rewarded. This consultant's telling us we need to get something out on a fairly regular basis, quick basis, but yet again, sustained performance like quarterly, semi-annual, annual plans, that measures sustained performance. So how do we deal with that contradiction? Let's take a look at the next slide. In this particular case, what you see is for the month of January, we're going to measure November, December, and January's performance for a payout in February. So what you're looking at is in a single month for that next payout for January, the payout in February is a function of the performance, the average performance of November, December, and January. Now, on the left-hand side, we come down to February, and then you see what we're measuring is the average performance for December, January, and February, payable in March. So essentially what you're having is every single month there's an opportunity for payout, so you get that frequent stimulation based on the average performance of the most recent 3 months. Stay away from fixed periods of time. For example, like a quarter. Visualize this. Oh, we're wonderful, we're great. All accounting people like things in quarters, right? So we're going to put together an incentive system for a quarter. Well, guess what? The first month of that quarter is really lousy. And people sense there's no way in God's green earth there's going to be a payout at the end of the quarter. What tends to happen to performance? It either goes flat or goes south. In this particular case, if you start out and you have a bad month, you darn well better make it the best bad month possible, because that month is going to get counted for 3 performance periods. Okay? So the notion of the rolling measures is really important. Never, ever, ever cap a self-funding incentive system. A cap on a self-funding incentive system is a cap on performance. But I see caps on incentive systems on a very, very regular basis. Here's an example. It's a cover of a monthly report card. And in this particular case, this company came up with these little icons for every one of their metrics. And the total fund is the sum of the positive and negative dollars of each of the KPI individual funds. In this case, you have a total of 22 grand. Let's take a look at the next slide. Avoid minimal payouts. When the total incentive fund from all KPIs is somewhere around 3 or 4%, most organizations tend not to want to distribute that money. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to keep it. So if you have an incentive fund that ranges somewhere in that 3-4%, then what we ask you to do, we suggest our clients do, is take that sum of money and just roll it over into the next performance period. If you've got lousy performance, that's a great time to huddle folks together and talk about the performance shortfall. Let's move on to my last principle, is validating and testing each KPI against 3 performance assumptions. So once you build your model and you've got all of your KPIs together, what you want to do is sit around with some folks and say, give me some performance assumptions, typically as a percentage, and let's apply those performance assumptions to every single one of the key performance indicators and see what the payout is going to be to employees and see what the net value is back to the shareholders. And I see all the time companies don't validate and test their models. So what they do is they put a cap on the plan. So uncap the plan, test the plan, be sure it is motivational to employees, and be sure it is a number that the owners are comfortable distributing. And typically, if you use the model that we just talked about, that will not be an issue. Let's take a look at the performance communication system. A well-designed performance measurement system and a powerhouse incentive pay system will be rendered impotent without a communication system that is coloring book simple, multidimensional, alive, and rigorously implemented like clockwork. The communication model typically has 7 phases, and let's take a look at them quickly. First thing that happens if you're going to launch this initiative, you have to have a communication to your workforce about the coming events, and that you're going to be putting together the plan with a group of employees representing a cross-section of the organization. After the plan has been approved, phase 2, to communicate the improved plan to employees, typically done with a plan announcement meeting, a PowerPoint presentation, and each employee receives a book. The people rolling out the plan are not the managers. They are the members of that design team. That's part of the commitment. That's part of the engagement. That's part of building credibility into the process. We also have new employees coming into the organization, and we go, ooh, we can't give them a full dose because these folks hardly understand where the restroom is and when they're going to get paid. So what you want to do is to give your employees at least a small smattering sense of what your entire high-performance work system is all about. And so what we typically look at is a small little flyer, a few pages, and this thing called a Smart Talk. A Smart Talk is an on-demand, online, narrated, animated, audio-visual presentation of what it is you want to talk about. So we have these little human-like cartoon characters come out and say, welcome, and here's what we have in place. So you hear Smart Talks, that these are probably about 15 minutes in duration. So a new employee comes in, he gets a little flyer, he reads it, plays the Smart Talk. So now the employee understands that, oh, there's a system in place that has measures, incentives, communication, and a performance improvement team process. Let's take a look at the next slide. On a regular basis, like clockwork, you have to have communication back to your workforce on a monthly basis as to how well they're doing relative to the key performance indicators and to the performance and to the incentive pay earned or lost for every one of the KPIs. This is done in performance communication meetings and a KPI report card. Now, interesting. Who do you think delivers these meetings? It's not management. It's not the design team. We typically gather people that say they're relatively bright, and most of them are, and we train them as to how to communicate these sessions in a motivational way and really, really understand the information. Smart Talks, for the entire plan that you put together, we typically build a Smart Talk around all of the plan design features as well as all of the key performance indicators. Here we talk about the performance communication system. We go live with the line of sight targets. Line of sight targets go live after all of the pieces are put together. You don't want to overwhelm the workforce with KPIs and line of sight targets at the same time. Get your KPIs in place. After they're in place for a couple, 3 months, and people are getting the report card and they understand them, then you start to put together the line of sight targets. And the next slide will show us simply more a board which displays all of the communication tools. The last topic I want to talk about is showing up on this next slide, and it's about the performance improvement team system. Nothing succeeds like the power of laser-focused performance improvement teams. The untapped potential in the form of employees' improvement ideas is the best prepaid path to operating excellence. You're already paying your employees a significant base pay. They all have ideas for betterment. And we're not capturing them to the extent that we can and to the extent that we should. You're already paying for it. You're paying for something that you're not even getting. And it's time to capture that. Think of your organization as a sphere. You've got this globe. That's your company. That's your organization. Everybody sees that sphere from a totally different perspective. You have some people looking at it from the bottom end, the right side, left side, back side, top side, looking at it from totally different perspectives. And they all see different things that are right, and they all see opportunities for improvement. The guy or the gal that's sitting behind the desk in the corner office doesn't understand that that machine out there that's making parts isn't tuned right, and quite frankly, we have a lot of rejects. He doesn't see that. And so that's why we have to go out and we have to capture the input from our employees. I'm not talking about suggestion boxes. Take your damn suggestion boxes and burn them ceremoniously. What I'm talking about is going out. Hope I didn't offend anyone. I hope. I'm talking about not a passive system, but a very aggressive system in which you want to go out and capture people's ideas for improvement. Now, you need some kind of a team structure. And enter the notion of the performance improvement teams. Approximately 10 to 20% of your workforce formally participates in performance improvement teams. The design of the PI teams, somewhere between 8 and 12 people, depending on the size of the organization. There's typically a coach who's responsible for the overall quality, 2 co-leaders who facilitate the session, and team members. And these are cross-functional teams, cross-organizational teams. Folks get together a minimum of twice a month, and we recommend sessions not going much more than 2 hours unless you're really hot and you're doing really well. They follow a very, very rigorous, disciplined 8-step problem-solving process. Most teams in our more open-minded organizations will give each of those teams anywhere between $1,000 and $2,000 to work on any particular problem they have in the organization to fix without necessarily going up the line and getting approval. In reality, those teams spend a lot of time talking with their bosses and their superintendents about what they're doing, but they are given that spending authority. And that goes a long way towards building this whole notion of engagement that we talk about. The PI teams set their own priorities. Not what the boss wants, but what they want. PI teams are held accountable for the results to management in a monthly accountability session. We strongly encourage the executives in those accountability sessions to focus on what has been delivered not what people are working on, because everybody is always working on something. So the real question is that I pose to the executives, ask the question, I want you to bring home the bacon, and ask that team to show you the bacon. And then lastly, in larger organizations where we have multiple teams, we create a hub. A hub is nothing more than a place where the co-leaders and the coaches get together about once a month for literally a half-hour session, just to be sure that there's no duplication of efforts or engaged in contradictory objectives. We had one particular case where the maintenance department was having problems, so they had some goals that they had, and that was to increase the amount of spare parts. And the accounting people were concerned about inventory levels, and the accounting people were working to reduce inventory levels, including the amount of spare parts. So clearly the value of the hub fixes those kinds of issues. So the hub is an important notion. And lastly, there's a variety of communication channels that employees have to get into the PI team. The PI team can identify problem areas in their own right, and we've already talked about that. Employees can email their problems, ideas, their concerns, and suggestions to the co-leaders. They set up an email for every one of those performance improvement teams. The employees can complete an on-time form and electronically send that to the PI team. Employees can complete a sample paper one, but not drop it in a box, but literally bring it to the PI team leaders. Employees may ask the PI team leader, can I come to the meeting and talk to you about an opportunity that I see for betterment? And every once in a while, we'll see a PI team hosting a brown bag lunch in which they'll invite some employees together on a random basis. They'll sit around during lunch and say, hey, what kind of things should we be working on? My experience is that those PI teams are loaded with issues, loaded with issues. It is not uncommon. When we do a training session, we take them through a 4-day training session. The last day of the session, they go live with a real PI meeting. It is not uncommon at the end of 3 or 4 hours of good heavy-duty brainstorming, like what's getting in the way of us being more successful, to have flip charts like this with 50, 60, 70 items on them. Not uncommon at all. And what happens is, superintendent comes in, the plant manager comes in, the president comes in, he looks at all this stuff and he goes, oh my God, where have I been? It's not where you've been, it's where you've not been. You've not been down deep into the organization. Companies have an extraordinary opportunity to achieve new levels of operating excellence for shareholders, owners, employees, and customers. Companies have an extraordinary opportunity to create an enhanced level of employee engagement for the purpose of improving performance like never before. Companies have an opportunity to expand employees' knowledge by an expanded performance measurement system and communication system. And companies can provide employees with an opportunity to earn additional income through improved operating performance. Yes, earn it, earn it. And that's a slice of American capitalism. I trust there will be a few points in this presentation worthy of your time. Thank you very much.